Welcome to Obey Your Strengths with Gallup certified strengths coach, Kersten.
Our guest today was the initial investor and former chairman of Rackspace. He is a big thinker and a real estate investor with a passion for entrepreneurship. His leadership and influence has transformed San Antonio into a fertile environment where startups and entrepreneurs can flourish. He's my strengths mentor and my friend, Mr. Graham Weston. Welcome to Obey Your Strengths, Graham.
Thanks, Kathy.
I want to start out our podcast like we do with every guest. Share with us what your top 5 strengths are.
Well, my top 5 strengths are maximizer and strategic, ideation, self-assurance, and individualization.
Can you tell us a little bit about what each one plays a role and how you see the world?
Well, I think that maximizer is the first, and I mostly tell people that the order doesn't matter very much, but you have to start somewhere. So maximizer, I think, is one of the strengths that defines me because I can always see how to make things better. And I also think that people with maximizer can see the potential in things, right? If you walk into McDonald's and you say, wow, they should organize it like that, I think that's a maximizer's mind. And so I think that my favorite part of maximizer is that I see potential in things. And that's in people and opportunities in, whatever it may be. And my second strength is strategic. Strategic, I think to a lot of people wish they had the strength strategic, and I think that's kind of a misguided idea. We shouldn't really envy other people's strengths, but I think strategic to me means a prioritizer. People who are strategic are looking for what is the most important thing we need to focus on. And strategic is also a strength that to me says, number one, some things are more important than others. So let's focus on the most important things. And secondly, how can we find clarity that we can all benefit from? How can we find clarity in a world of clutter? Then there's ideation. Now, ideation is an absolute insatiable curiosity for ideas. I have a lot of knowledge. I have a very broad knowledge that's very thin, right? I know a little bit about a lot of things, and I'm fascinated with knowing a little bit about everything. So I like to think about ideation being like grass, kind of grows everywhere, but it doesn't grow very deep.
I like that imagery. Okay.
And now ideation also means that I kind of run off on tangents. What was that movie? There was a movie where they said squirrel. Right. I always think about ideation being that, which is kind of running off on tangents sometimes. Also, people with ideation use a lot of analogies. Okay. Self-assurance is, I think about as often wrong, but never in doubt. Right. People with ideation, they feel very strongly that their view of something is, they feel very strongly about their view of something, but not everything. I mean, I don't necessarily have opinions about everything. There are a lot of things I have no opinions about, but the few things that I do, I feel very strongly about. And also, self-assurance to me is a little bit different from command. Command is more of a self-confidence, whereas self-assurance is more confidence about the things you believe in. And then individualization is a fascination with what makes people unique. Where you came from, what your background is, the things that interest you. And so I think that the people strengths that I have, if you want to call them that, are really maximizer, where I see the potential in people. I can see what is good in them. Okay. And then secondly, individualization makes me actually interested in those unique things about people.
You and I share maximizer and individualization. Individualization is in my 6 through 10, but I think it's the magic combination that makes me good at what I do.
Yes.
And I learned about strengths from you,
yes.
A maximizer individualization person. I've experienced your individualization. When I joined Rackspace in 2006, I had already met you years prior, and I was sitting in the new employee orientation with 50 other people, and you were there telling us about strengths and telling us about the founding story of the company, and you looked at me and you said, "Hey, I know you." And I said, "We met 2 years ago at Junior Achievement."
Yes.
See, how do you remember that? You meet hundreds of people per week. How in the world did you remember me? That's your individualization at work.
Yeah.
I mean, you just have a memory, a knack for remembering people and where you met them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. First of all, I think it's somewhat the way that I where you came into my life matters to me, and kind of that junior achievement event with some sort of business plan
Yes,
competition.
Who Wants to Be a CEO?
Right. That event
it was that event for
I
high
remember
schoolers.
that, and I think it gives people the impression that I'm paying attention. Right.
Absolutely. It's a relationship builder. I mean, I was impressed.
Yeah.
It left an amazing impression on me that, wow, Graham Weston remembered me from years ago. So that's really cool.
Oh.
Individualization in action. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing your top 5 with us. You were an early adopter in the strengths movement. I want to hear the story of how you discovered strengths philosophy and how you introduced it at Rackspace. Because really, as one of the initial investors at Rackspace, you had joined the company as president too very early on, correct?
Yes. So when I was an entrepreneur sort of straight out of college, and I always dreamed of finding a business or a business opportunity that would sort of fulfill my potential of being an entrepreneur. And I didn't know what industry that would be. I didn't know if it would be a company with 10 employees or 10,000 employees. I had no idea. I didn't even have a sense of how big I wanted it to be. I wanted to find myself a successful entrepreneur after my career was over. Mm-hmm. And so I was involved in several different businesses, and I would say my early point of view was that I just worshiped Jack Welch. I would read books about him. He was the former CEO of General Electric. He was an incredibly successful CEO, and I just wanted to be him. Mm-hmm. And I realized that so many of the things that he espoused, I just wasn't very good at it. I was not a very good manager. I was not organized. I was terrible. My follow-through skills are very weak. I find it hard to keep up with my email. I mean, there's so many things that he said I needed to do well that I did not do well, that I struggled to do. But because I was determined and had put lots of energy into it, I would say that, I found success despite my weaknesses, but I beat myself up all the time. I did that to the point that I finally hired a coach, an organization coach, to come in and help me. And she worked with me every Tuesday for like 3 hours to try to help me get organized and to learn how to be organized. Now, I'd taken several courses in being organized, like, touch a file only once, work on high priority things and put all things in file folders and, keep a list of to-dos. And, back in those days, it was all on paper.
Right.
And I knew the mechanics of being organized, but I found the process of being organized incredibly taxing. And it's so weird for those of you who are organized. It's hard to understand. But I remember after I hired this coach, my whole office was very happy that I'd hired this coach. They hoped that I would be more on time, that I would stop miss meetings, that I would double book things, that I would have better follow-through skills and all those things. But after several months, I realized that I was not succeeding, and I found the process that the coach was teaching me, I found to be incredibly tedious. And after about 3 months, I started leaving my office without my desk clean. And this was one of her real touchstones. She said, you want to leave your desk clean every single day so that you start the next day organized. And I just found it. I left one day with my desk disorganized, and I felt like a complete failure. And I remember that day so vividly. And it was soon thereafter that I went to my colleagues and said, look, I've decided that I'm just not a very organized person. And I'm afraid that my efforts to be more organized have not been a success. And they kind of looked at me and said, okay, what's the news you're going to tell us? But then soon thereafter, I read this book called Soar With Your Strengths by Don Clifton. And that book really gave me a new way of thinking about myself and about the talents that I had. And what it said was that our success arises from the areas where we're strong, our areas of natural strength or weakness. Strength or talent.
Mm-hmm.
And it said that this is where our successes come from. And this just made total sense to me. And it allowed me to go in and say, I'm going to reorganize what I do around my strengths. And it really was a transformational moment for me. And the book Soar with Your Strengths is kind of a cheap little book. The paper's not even very nice. It didn't feel like an important book at the time, and I think it was not a commercial success really. But when I read an article in Fast Company magazine about that was written by Marcus Buckingham, and then I read Marcus Buckingham's book called Now Discover Your Strengths, and also the book First Break All the Rules. Both of these books were world-changing books to me about how companies should be managed, as well as how should we manage ourselves. And I would say between those books, really, my life completely changed, and my view of myself completely changed. I went from where I felt that I was really a remarkably lucky, disorganized failure, but because I really beat myself up and I felt tremendously inferior to the people who could just have their act together all the time. And I suddenly had a frame for thinking about how people fit together to play their role. One of my favorite analogies by a friend of mine was that, that each of us is unique like fingers on our hand. Each of our fingers are needed. And it's hard to say that one is more important than the other because we need all of our fingers.
Right.
So I really changed my point of view about sort of where my success was coming from, and that I was succeeding despite my weaknesses. And I really allowed myself for the first time to create a deliberate support structure that said, how do I get the most productivity and impact? And that involved sort of admitting my weaknesses and asking people to help look after me. And I felt tremendously guilty about that because I really felt the idea of having a personal assistant or having other people help you, I really felt was somewhat old-fashioned. The idea of having someone as your support person or collaborator. But I really found that's when I think my impact went up substantially. And also I really I saw that my job was not about the execution phase. It's more the inspiration phase. It's more the direction phase and the how do we make the right decisions phase. And I know that when I met the founders of Rackspace, that all of my strengths came to play on that day. We met at a hamburger joint called Chester's Hamburgers. We met for 5 hours straight, and I could just see the opportunity. I believed in the opportunity. And my partner and I looked at each other and said, look, this is something we're going to do. And I felt so confident about it. So a few weeks later, we're in business together. And I would just say that today Rackspace is over 6,000 employees. I mean, it's a $2 billion a year in revenue company. And but we got off on the right foot, and we had really a magic group of the original 5 founders, or a magic group of people. And we worked very, very well together, especially at that very early phase. Even though I was terrible at the execution part of starting the company, that's where my business partner was incredibly good. That is, if without him being there, we probably wouldn't have gotten the deal in place. And so I think that as Rackspace grew from 10 people to 10 people to 6,000 people, I saw the strength story so many times. And you're, of course, one of the greatest success stories too.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind of you. Well, I know what I've heard from Rackers, and that's Rackspace employees, is that the culture, the strength-based culture, many times was the first time that they felt like it was okay to be themselves in a work environment.
Yes.
I've heard quotes like, many times it's when they're going through the new employee orientation, where they say things like, I think I'm going to get to figure out what's really great in me here.
Yes.
This is going to give me the opportunity to do what I do best. I mean, that's the stuff that Gallup writes in the books, but it's people who really believed it because they saw other people actually doing it. And that started with the founding team.
Yes.
Right? That started with, and Pat Condon has been quoted saying there was something magical in those 5 guys in that room, that we each brought something different to the table, different strengths, and it wouldn't have worked if one person was missing.
That's right.
So I think that, and you just said it again, I mean, I think it is such a testament to the importance of partnership and understanding where your assets are and where your liabilities are, and not worrying about your liabilities, but bringing your assets all the time, like your strengths, and helping people bring their own to the table too. So that's incredible.
I think also one of the concepts that I think is underestimated is that it is totally okay for individuals to have weaknesses, but it's really not okay for teams to have weaknesses. Because those weaknesses are they're like tripwires. They're going to trip you. You don't know where they are, but they're going to trip you. When you have weaknesses as a team, there are going to be obstacles that are going to set you back. So, as individuals though, obviously weaknesses are by definition things that get in the way of great performance. But I think that it is mandatory that as a team that we find ways to make sure that each of the roles that needs to be played is being played well by someone with strengths. And I think as a company gets bigger, as a company goes from 5 to 50 to 500, really it's all about how do we make sure that the critical roles have people that are super strong, and also that those weaknesses are being covered by people who have strengths in those areas. Of course, a company needs organization. I'm not the person to put in charge of that, right? But organization, while it may not be what I'm good at, it needs to get done and done well. And I think also it's important that each of these individual roles may have a higher pay opportunity than another one, but they are all incredibly important, and all those areas have to be need to be covered and handled. So companies really do need to. Sometimes we don't focus on weaknesses enough. I think that our potential, our success comes from strengths, but weaknesses are the things that trip us up. I think about Bernie Madoff.
Oh, yeah.
Bernie Madoff.
Yes.
Did he have, he was a con man. And a con man means confidence, right? Does it mean that he had too much confidence ability? I would say no. What he had was not enough integrity. He had a weakness he was just basically dishonest. So he used his incredible skills at salesmanship and sort of building confidence in people. People wanted to buy from him, but that was not his problem. It wasn't his confidence ability. It was his lack of integrity and honesty. So again, even a guy like Bernie Madoff ultimately got tripped up because of his weaknesses.
What a great point. So I want to talk about how we named this podcast.
Yes.
Okay, so
yes.
I reached out to you. I was leading employee engagement at Rackspace back in 2010 time frame, and we were seeing some attrition from long tenured Rackers going on in the culture and the organization. I was wanting to know what's going on, and I know that you sometimes chat with long tenured Rackers on their last day of work, and so I went to the top and knocked on your door and said, no, you didn't have a door, cube, and said, hey, can we chat about why Rackers are leaving? And you gave me this great, it was like you had studied it and wrote the book on it, because you said there's 3 reasons Rackers leave. Do you remember this conversation, Graham?
A little bit.
Okay, good. You said Rackers leave because they have a bigger, better deal. We were getting poached, right?
Yes.
Like talent. We were very successful. Talent was growing. Of course, who's not going to go leave for a bigger title, a bigger paycheck, a bigger project, whatever it might look like, right? The bigger, better dream.
I mean, some of those companies actually camped out at the Starbucks across the street.
That's true.
Yeah,
yes.
And just poached our people. Yeah.
And then you also said that sometimes people just need to go on an odyssey.
Yes.
And, an example of that, and Lorenzo and I talked about this in our podcast, is that, entrepreneurship. I mean, how many Rackers left Rackspace because they learned about their strengths and they got the entrepreneurship bug and wanted to go try something on their own, right?
Yes.
Or they wanted to go do something that was a higher calling, like join a mission or move to a different country and do something completely different because they had just built a successful life at Rackspace. I really see that was the foundation of it.
Yes.
At least it was why I started my own business.
Yes.
And then the last thing you said is, or they're not obeying their strengths.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, obeying your strengths? Like, I've heard playing to your strengths. I've never heard obeying your strengths. Tell me what that concept, I've never even read that in Gallup books. Where did that concept come from? How did you figure that out?
Well, I think that there's strengths like my ideation, which is more about sort of curiosity. It's like I'm insatiably curious about things, and I want to learn about all sorts of things. But if I don't get to use that strength for a week, that's probably okay. But I think that there's a strength like belief, which you have. And I think that if you find people with belief need to obey their strengths, meaning that if you are not in an organization that has values that are consistent with yours, it's not going to work. And I think that there are strengths that actually say, if you're in a job where you can't utilize your strengths adequately, I think you need to obey your strengths and sort it out. Leave the company, leave the job, change jobs. But you really should not stay in a job that is not first aligned with your strengths. But there are certain strengths that really you truly need to obey, and I need to make a list of those.
Oh,
but
yeah,
I think
like competition.
Competition.
Right? That's a great one. Like
Right.
you have
Right.
to have competitors for the drive.
That's right.
Or a learner might be a good
Learners.
one. Okay, let's go with learners.
I'd say restorative.
restorative.
I would say that
Yes.
there are people who are incredibly enthusiastic about a job at the beginning, and all of a sudden becomes very routine, and they get very demoralized. Or they're learners who, at the beginning of a new job, they get so energized.
The learner
learning.
high, right? The learner's high.
The learner, I like that. There's a book, The Learner's High. Rackspace had something like 40% of all of our employees have learner because they're geeks.
Right.
So learners love that first year of learning. I mean, every single day they're just absolutely absorbing learning all the time. But as soon as the job becomes a little bit routine, they start to wonder whether they are, their sense of engagement and energy dissipates because they're just turning the crank, getting the job done.
Right.
And really what they're yearning for is the time and permission and the need to go and dig into something all the way.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know what? And so few people were self-aware, or so few people are self-aware that it's just their learner that has hit a plateau, and that you need to invest in it. So, and it shows up in weird ways, right? Like in employee engagement studies, when I would be learning about people, there's a shelf life to learner, right? Or you're a learner, your shelf life on jobs for learners, like 18 months, 2 years, where if I have mastered this job and it's not changing enough to energize my learner, suddenly I feel restless and bored. And that may show up like, you don't pay me enough. I don't like my boss. I don't like this project, whatever. And then you enter in something new and exciting, like, oh, can you go work on this project? And suddenly engagement soars again.
That's right. And we saw, I think when I did the rookie orientation classes, I would always ask, how many of you left your last job because you stopped learning? And invariably, every single learner would raise their hand. So you'd think that people leave their job because they weren't making enough money or because their boss was a jerk. Those are good reasons, right? But really, most people, most learners at least, leave because they stopped learning, because they have this curiosity and capacity to go very deep, to learn everything there is about a topic. And when that is not harnessed, you must obey it. I mean, you need to find an outlet for that. There's such a thirst for going deep on things by learners that you must obey it. You have to go find an outlet for that. And I used to say in our orientation classes, you left your last job because you stopped learning. You're going to love this new job for a couple of years. But then your challenge is, don't change jobs just because you stopped learning. You need to find a way to stay with the same company, but keep learning. So that was the challenge, was to say, don't quit your job every time you slow down in learning, because there's so many different aspects to every company. So I think that that is, you need to go actively find what that next mission is. And that's why I think strengths need to be obeyed, because this is often what drives us into a funk. Is, I think, restorative is another one. People with restorative are, I think about like firefighters are people with restorative, because when they sit around all day long waiting for that alarm bell to ring, but when it rings, you want a firefighter to have restorative to rescue from a car crash, to come and put out the house fire. That is, the people with restorative are truly extraordinarily adrenaline-driven people, and they're when there is a need to get something fixed, they are driven, they're focused, they are absolutely at their best. But when every single day turns routine and there's no need to restore things or to fight fires or to solve problems. Most engineers are restorative.
Yes.
Because they are problem solvers. The more urgent the problem, the better. But as soon as things become routine, I think people restorative get into a funk, and they start to their mind goes wild, thinking about, well, I'm not where I should be. The boss is a jerk, and look at all this boring stuff, and I'm wasting my potential. And really, it all comes down to that they are not getting to exercise or utilize that strength.
As I've coached in the last 5 years and independently outside of Rackspace and done lots of individual coaching, I've learned that all 34 strengths have needs.
Yes.
Right? They all
Yes.
have needs of a certain type, and those strengths are hungry and that you have to feed them. And
Yes.
if you don't, you have internal dissonance that then manifests itself in
Yes.
other ways. And sometimes it's just you have low energy or not a lot of clarity in your purpose or your drive. And sometimes it's even worse, where you just feel toxic in the job you're in or the business that you're in. So, man, obey your strengths is a thing.
Yeah. Well, it is. And I think also that there are magic moments during a role or an employment, whether it's a marriage or whether it's a job, where you can look back and think, wow, those are great times because I really was at my best. I mean, I know many, many mothers look back and with their kids were little and say, wow, that was really hard work. I loved it. And to me, that is the telltale sign of strengths being put to work, where think about the mom who's incredibly hardworking, absorbed, consumed by demands by the kids, working so incredibly hard, but also feels so rewarded. And I think that is an example of home life, but those same examples happen at work.
Absolutely. Yeah. In 2008-ish, I know I'd heard you talk about your vision of what a strength-based city might look like. Was that in your vision? Was that an ideation moment, or do you see a potential for an entire city to be strength-based?
I do. I think that Rackspace was definitely, or is definitely a strength-based company.
Right.
As you mentioned, people come up to me all the time and say that they really they found something in themselves during their time at the company. I think there is an opportunity for San Antonio to be a strength-based city, for any city to be. Any city would be better off if it were strengths-based. I don't know that we've gotten all the way there, but I think that the idea of strengths is pretty mainstream now. I think that there is a lot greater acceptance for strengths-based thinking than there was a decade ago. And I think we're still working on this strengths-based city. To me, it starts of saying, how do you ultimately get kids and their parents to think in a strengths-based way? And I think that there are universities that are following strengths. There are high schools following strengths. But I think the sooner people start to frame their natural abilities as being the wellspring for their success, I think that is the most important framing of what strengths, a strengths-based city needs to see its natural abilities and assets as being the things to guard and ultimately to foster. So
you've experimented with strengths in universities, with whether it's through your thought leadership at different universities around strengths, or helping high schoolers understand and learn their strengths. How, in your own experience, at what age? I know what Gallup says and the science says, but like in your working knowledge as a strengths coach and a thought leader and a mentor in this area, how do you see human development working? I mean, do you think that we can really see people's strengths when they're in their high school years?
Oh, I think you could see them when they're little, because my middle son is very competitive, and he has been competing with his brothers, even though it was kind of a one-way competition, right? He would be being determined to beat them at video games, and they were going, yeah, we want to win, but the brother wants to win more, right? So I saw those strengths come out at a very, very young age. So I think that strengths definitely come out early. The question is when when do you start to really help the kids think about their strengths and foster their strengths? And that's probably in the early teens. I think that as parents, we can, if we see an opportunity to provide sort of extracurricular training or education, I think that obviously the more strengths-based, the better. But I also think that during the early days, you want to make sure that you really have access to or exposure to a lot of different things. And that ultimately, the older you get, the more you want to narrow down. Right. I mean, I think all three of my kids did chess competitions in the early years, but only really one of them really got jazzed by the competitions. And so it didn't make sense to have push the other two to keep doing chess. Or, my oldest son does a crazy sport called horseback archery, and he was the only one interested in it. And so, it was something that it naturally emerged as an interest and a talent and a strength for him. So it made sense to foster that.
One of the hardest parts of being a strength-based parent is allowing there to be weaknesses. It also could be the fact I'm a maximizer, and part of my maximizer is a little bit raw, where I just want my kids to be great at everything.
Yes.
Which it needs to develop and mature. I realize that. But as a fellow parent with maximizer, tell me a little bit. Your kids are grown. My kids are little, 10 and under. Yours are all high school and above, right? So you have a 17-year-old as your youngest now. Yes. Has it been hard for you as a maximizer in seeing areas of potential in your kids that they're perhaps not pursuing, or that they have weaknesses?
It is hard when someone is struggling with a school subject. It is very hard to sweep that under the rug and say it doesn't matter, because of course it matters. If your child is doing bad at math or reading, we naturally say, how do we help you with those areas? I think the harder thing to do is to accept that weakness is a manifestation that is probably in there for good. And so if someone is not good at math, let's get through the math stuff. And even though it's not going to be great, we're not going to make excuses for. I think hard work is another. Being able to apply yourself and do something that you don't like to do is another strength.
Right. Stick-to-itiveness.
Stick-to-itiveness.
Yes, absolutely. It's very important in my household.
and so, I do think that sometimes, one of the strategies for overcoming a weakness is work really hard at it. Okay.
Right. Invest a lot more than you want to.
and while that may not bring the outsized returns, outsized impact that you'd like, I think that sometimes that you just have to apply yourself and hunker down and compensate for the lack of strength. Compensate for the weakness. Right?
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I think, but also the idea of stick-to-itiveness or determination or tenacity. These are, a tenacious person is not going to be defeated by a weakness, right? And so I think that part of what you're trying to do is to say, every day is not roses, and you're not allowed to just focus on the school subjects that you love. You actually have to bring out those other strengths, which is tenacity, determination, and an ability to face adversity and pain. Right. And so that is actually, part of, I actually think an awful lot of school is that, which is being able to get an assignment, get it done, turn it in, and actually commit to an imaginary deadline. An imaginary deadline is the teacher says it's due on this date, and finally that date comes, and some people commit to getting the work done and some people don't. An awful lot of school is teaching people or giving students the opportunity to accept that goal as their own. And even though it's the teacher's goal, it's not theirs. Being able to hunker down and get it done, even in a subject you don't like, is actually part of what school does. It's maybe one of the most important things school does.
Businesses ask us to do it. I mean, I had to turn in expense reports, even though I hated tracking receipts and doing all, that was a thing I had to do, right? So, we're asked to do things. That's why it's called work.
Yeah, that's right.
What you just reminded me of, this drive some people have strengths that just naturally bring that drive to the table. And in my coaching practice, I've met more than one. There's actually a theme of people I have coached who happen to have the combination of achiever and responsibility. And the storyline is similar in many ways across all clients in that they have taken a job, they did a great job, achiever, right?
Yes.
They worked very hard.
Yes.
They gave it their all. They were so dependable, responsibility, in that role and worked hard that they then got invited or asked or moved to go do another project. And how they end up in coaching with me is through, they have found that they are at a point in their career and they said, wait a minute, how did I get here? This is not what I started out. This was not my initial intent to be where I am today in this middle management or where I am today working for this. I had a dream at one point. I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't this.
Yes.
So help me, Kathy, figure out my mission. So I do some personal mission statement coaching and help me figure out what my purpose is. And, through coaching, we kind of unravel this idea that their achiever and responsibility sort of got them. They're so dependable to other people and they want to help people and they do such a good job. So that combination of drive and dependability to others has led them very far off their career track.
Yes. I think people with responsibility they're constantly yearning to come through for people. They want to be seen as dependable, as being someone that can be relied upon. And it's just very easy for people with responsibility to be so eager, so willing to be relied on that they're always working on other people's goals.
Oh, that is so good. Ooh, that's so good.
I mean, they had a lot of satisfaction along the way.
Absolutely.
Right?
But it just got them off track.
I think also that, I have worked with a number of people who've reached a breaking point. Where, I think that where achiever responsibility is a great example because they are so committed. They have also a lot of capacity for productivity.
Absolutely.
Right? They also get a little charge of energy every time they get stuff done, every time they come through for the boss or for their colleague, but they simultaneously take on too much, right? And overcommit themselves.
And beat themselves up when they don't
beat
deliver.
themselves up. And beat themselves up. And so I think
burnout with a capital B, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that where you're going?
It is. And I think that it's very easy for them to be working very long hours and ultimately find that they are that they have been pursuing other people's goals, right? So I think I think also there's at some level there are strengths desiring to get something done every hour, which is achiever strength.
Right.
The desire to come through for people, responsibility. These are on one hand very good strengths because I'm saying they're all good strengths.
They're all
of
good.
course,
Yeah, they're all
but
good.
I mean, these are strengths that can be satisfied in a very short period of time. And so it's very hard to sometimes think long term, right? And so you can get a little bit, you can get a little bit off track, or find yourself having spent so much energy and not ultimately pursued the goals of your own, right?
I've been thinking a lot about talent as a filter. This is just the idea that it filters what comes in. Like literally our top 5 sometimes will filter what information we're taking in an environment or from a person because we're consuming this information through our own lens of strength. And it also filters what comes out. So let's think about command, like the strength of command. Man, when someone's talking to a person with command, what's going through the command's head? When are they going to pause so I can say what I want to say, right? I sense chaos and I'm fixing to jump in here and take leadership.
Right.
Like they're waiting to jump in to take command. And then what comes out of command is usually direct and sometimes not very tactful, right? It's very, sometimes sharp.
Yeah, sometimes
if it's okay,
if it's paired with activator. But I think especially, I think that command has a natural sense of like someone should be in charge, right?
Right.
I would be a perfect person to be in charge.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
And so I think that by its nature, you end up with a lot of people
in charge. Command.
Right. And often very good at it because they want to step forward, and they believe in themselves as the leader.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, you just reminded me that whenever I went to the outskirts of Mexico City to work with a nonprofit of missionaries that were trying to solve the problem of poverty in the mountains of Mexico City. The most brilliant and influential thinkers I have ever met in my life. I'm sitting across from one, so that for you are one of those. But the gentleman who had the idea of how to create the solution that was going to solve this poverty problem in Mexico City, and they're working towards it. The 5 people in the executive team, 4 of them had command.
Wow.
And the strengths session that we did lasted more than 12 hours.
Wow.
I went down there for a 4-hour strength session or maybe a 5-hour. I didn't know. We did not stop. And it was in Spanish, so I was being translated. I mean, it was the most intense strength session. And at 9 o'clock, at 9 o'clock p.m., I said, I am done, y'all. Like, I have no more coaching in me. But it was command all across the board. But before they had taken their strengths, they were just fighting. They didn't have a word or an idea of like, what is getting in our way? It's that we all have these really strong leadership desires that we should move in this direction. And so they were constantly battling each other.
In today's world, there is a lot of focus on diversity. And I think that one of the things that kind of gets lost is we actually want diverse thought.
Right.
And I think that, the idea is, of course, we want to create diverse opportunity. People of color, males, females, should all have opportunities that are similar. We should have no group of people that have less opportunity than another. But I think that really what delivers results is diversity of thought. And I think that adding women to a team that's mainly male brings diversity of thought more than diversity of gender, right? That's the idea, is that let's make sure that in addition to giving all people equal opportunity, that we're ultimately trying to run a business with the best results, or trying to create a nonprofit with best results. And diversity of thought is tremendously important. So I think let's make sure that diversity of thought is there. This missionary story is very interesting to me because having an organization with 4 leaders with command it just isn't going to work, because all 4 of them are probably right in their own way, and they're probably all equally able to go and pursue their mission, at a very high level. But all 4 of them probably are not going to get the job done. That is, if they have to work together, and if they're probably not, they do not have the diversity of thought that they're going to really need to succeed. I think I would just say that that is probably a formula for the fact that you had a nonprofit missionary organization all with command says something really interesting. I wonder what it is about this particular.
Well, I think part of their, to go a little deeper, the mission that they're on is to fight against the corruption that is going on the people who are in poverty, right? I mean, it is unbelievable how there's so much corruption in just getting drinking water or electricity. Yeah. And I sense that their command felt called to that because they could stand up for the little guy who can't stand up for himself.
Yes.
And they felt like, this is my chance to rise to the occasion. I'm the kind of person who rises to the occasion. So they were called for that. So they moved down there. But I think the ones that had hired me were American. And then the other folks were from other countries. And then there were some like Native Mexicans that were there and doing the work of their people, right? But too much command. And when I followed up with them later on, the team had disintegrated. Parts of the team had disintegrated because some of the command had learned to partner well. Like, I take care of this, you take care of that.
Yes.
But parts disintegrated.
Yes. Yeah, I would not expect a team of people with command to work as peers very well. I think people with command need to have really clear sense of authority. And I think that without that clarification, without the clear duties and sense of authority, I think you're going to continue to you're going to spend a lot of effort on conflict, right? Which is, of course, activators believe in conflict, but you don't want to have a ton of conflict that wastes a lot of time.
Right.
But I mean, I think that you probably had a lot of belief in that group as well.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
So
absolutely. That's a
I
great
think
point.
that people with belief
Yes.
tend to be drawn to charitable missions. They tend to be drawn to the military. They tend to be drawn to spiritual or religious causes as well. And if I think about someone giving their lives to help a village, rural village in Mexico, I think about having belief would be a real asset, right? Also, people with command are very tough. They're very resilient. They're not affected by little criticisms, or they feel they're very tough. They're courageous. And so to be to be a foreigner in a small village in Mexico that is corrupt, I can understand how it is only the tough survive, right? You kind of have to be prepared to have a little intimidation,
Absolutely.
right, in order to just survive. So when some self-selecting bias, right?
Yeah.
So the people without command may have quit, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's another gentleman that I'm coaching, totally different. He's in London, and I'm coaching him, and he's got self-assurance, command, activator, and responsibility. I think achiever, if that's his top 5. And he's in the computer world. He's a geek. He's actually in security operations, but he yearns to do things of high risk.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you were built to be a firefighter.
Wow.
You were built to be a first responder.
Yes.
And he gets frustrated because he's a director level. He's at the director level. He's frustrated with their lack of urgency of the security team around him. And I'm thinking, man, you're just in the wrong. Like, if I am in a car accident, I want you, the first guy to show up to get me out of this car accident. Like, you have got the build to do high risk, high intense situations. He makes great decisions. He has great judgment. He trusts his gut. He goes.
Security may be the right field, but he may be in the wrong role.
Right.
I think about one of the best internet security companies that Rackspace ever worked with is a company called CrowdStrike. And they were like the Navy SEALs. When you have a big problem, they descend from the skies and work 24/7 to get you out of a jam. And it could be that being in a role like that, waiting to be called in to a situation where the urgency is very clear. I think activators often get frustrated with they get impatient, frustrated with the lack of urgency of things. And I think the problem is that activators feel absorbed by that sense of urgency and the emotion of that. And when they don't find that shared by their peers, it's very demoralizing, frustrating, and it makes them want to disengage. But I think that the activators also need to realize that their sense of urgency is always turned to 10, and therefore they need to find themselves operating in places where that is warranted and rewarded. And a lot of operating companies, if you go to your local Target, the manager of the Target there's nothing urgent right now. Someone just shoplifted over here and something broken on aisle 3, but all of those little problems don't rise to the level of a sort of urgency to the manager.
Right.
Or not all jobs are as urgent as the activator perceives them. So I would say go find a role that
allows
that's rewarded.
Allows you to obey your activator.
Yeah. Right.
I think I need a coaching session with you on my maximizer.
Oh,
I need to tone it down. I need to understand my maximizer because it's hard to see it for yourself whenever you see the lens through maximizer all the time. So
I do think maximizers need to understand that their desire to make things better is seen by a lot of people as being criticism.
Yes.
Right. Especially at home.
With my kids.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And I think that actually one of the things that's helpful about having the language of strengths is it allows you to explain that you see certain things so acutely that having people understand if they want to joke about your maximizer, it's probably a good way to diffuse the notion that you're being critical of them.
That showed up all the time in my teams at Rackspace.
Yeah.
Right. Like, stop maximizing, Kathy. It's good enough. Like, or, what do you, and I learned tricks. So instead of me starting out with my maximizer comments, because I had them always after observing a trainer, because we were in the training world at Rackspace University. And I would say, before I go through my list of things, tell me what you saw that you did well and what things you want to improve. So I let them take the ownership of some of their feedback first, and then I would affirm and then help, add on to that. But my maximizer is constantly saying, "Oh, if you just would have done this, if you just could have done that, if it just would have been this." I always want to redo, always.
Yeah.
Tonight, I'll lay in bed and think about, I wish I would have asked Graham X.
Yes.
I missed an opportunity.
But see, that desire for things to be great is an incredibly strong asset. I think that maturing in thinking about strengths is to say, how do we ultimately make that most effective, most impactful? And I think your little trick of saying, I'm not going to maximize the beginning of a meeting is a very good one. And it's a way, it's not that the maximizer is ever bad. The problem is that there are windows of opportunity in every discussion and every relationship. Talking about a serious subject to your husband. I mean, there are times not to do it. We know that, right?
Right.
First thing morning, Sunday morning may not be the time to do it, or Friday night may not be the time to do it. There are windows of opportunity. And so understanding that your maximizer may really want to make a comment, but if your goal is to have impact, not just to say it, that's when you need maturity about how can I give this feedback to have maximum influence or impact.
And that little bit of information applies to all strengths, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Harmony needs to remember that sometimes conflict is inevitable and sometimes it's a good thing, right? Empathy needs to know that sometimes it's okay that somebody's going to get their feelings hurt.
Yes.
Right? I mean, self-assurance sometimes needs to know that they can't be right all the time.
Yes.
So I said, I'm just thinking like how that applies to all of them.
Yes.
Managing your strengths like a volume, a dial.
Understanding about how it, Kathy, your maximizer, sometimes people see you as critical. And when you go to someone with responsibility and immediately give maximizer feedback, they're going to go, damn, I just can't I can't impress her. I can't come through for her.
Yeah.
And also, I think that part of strengths is accepting who you are. And the other part of strengths is helping accept, honor, and realize that the strengths of others are exactly the way they were made. They're exactly as they should be and as they are.
Yes.
Right?
And appreciated about them. Like when you said, I love that you said honor, because we do need to appreciate their differences versus, I was sitting in a very tall building in Philadelphia, the Comcast building, on a very high floor doing an executive workshop. And I literally heard the leader, maybe I shouldn't tell this story. I literally heard the leader say to another person across the room who had achiever that you're going to grow out of that.
Yeah.
And I was like, like, we're so misaligned. I shouldn't be here doing strengths coaching with this team. We were like, me and the leader are not aligned on what this strengths thing is, because she just told the guy across from her that he's going to grow out of his achiever. Like I used to be that way, but I grew out of it. Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. Like we missed the point here.
Yeah, exactly.
And I looked at her card. She had self-assurance.
Exactly.
There's no proving anything to her. So anyway.
Well, but I think that manager would benefit by really understanding that, criticizing someone's strengths is not a very good way to bring out the best in them.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's really a way of thinking that says that I'm okay the way that I am. Mm-hmm. I need to accept that the natural way my mind works, we need to harness that and make the most of it. Right. And that's one aspect of it. The other one is that the way we tend to judge people through our own lens. I'm good at math. I've been good at math my entire life. And it's very easy for me to say, what do you mean? You can't do those numbers in your head? You are weak. When actually, we need to all realize that we tend to judge people from our own strengths, when actually if we're all doing that, it means that we're always going to have respect for only the people who are like us. And actually, like all the fingers on your hand, we need all the different roles in this organization to work. That is, we need all the different strengths to come together and cover up those weaknesses. And again, the more you think that only people who think like you and or are like you, if everyone has to be like you, you're going to have enormous weaknesses in your organization. To me, that's the cardinal sin, which is we can all have weaknesses, but our teams cannot have weaknesses. And when you have a leader that you mentioned who sees certain strengths as being immature, well, you better get ready to have an organization that has very prominent weaknesses, right? Mm-hmm. I think that one of the things that individualization does is it tends to find good in people in every role. And I think this is one of the reasons why it's a powerful people strength, because it sort of sees the value in every role. And I think that ultimately, you need leaders who are able to find value in every role. Because if you think accounting is dumb, you're going to end up with people in accounting who are resentful, or the good ones who leave. If you think that the people in sales are dumb, you'll find the same thing there. And so I think that this is part of the challenge of every senior leader, is to find value in each part of their organization and to see that preventing a weakness from emerging in the team is critical to him or her. I think what we learned at Rackspace is that strengths, I'm very proud of the way we implemented strengths at Rackspace, but I always sold strengths as something that the individual takes control of. And I didn't really promise employees that the company would always think in a strengths-based way. I wanted us to, but the boss just wants to get his or her job done. And what your strengths are, or what you want to do every day, in the short run, doesn't matter to that person. It just doesn't matter to the boss. Like, get the job done. Get the job done. I need to get your job done. In the long run, your strengths matter a lot. In the short run, the boss just wants to get the job done and wants to find people who can get things done. So I really think the idea of strengths is much more of a way of thinking for the individual, for you as the mother, the father, the parent, the employee, the boss. In your role, how do you get the most out of your potential? Rackspace works very hard to think in a strengths-based way. But I think that whether the boss looks at you and says, Kathy, I know this isn't with your strengths, so I'm not going to make you do it, I think that's unrealistic. And I think that it's also that ultimately we have to work together to get the job done. Whether it's your church, whether it's your family, somebody's got to get the laundry done. Whether they want to, whether it's your strengths or not, the job has to get done. And so I think that we shouldn't use strengths as an excuse to not doing things that we need to do. But I think in the long run, the strengths are the only wellspring of our success. I like the example of the Rain Man. Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man, he couldn't drive, he couldn't tie his shoes, he could do hardly anything, but he was great at math and he could gamble and win at the gambling table. Well, that I think is a lot of the way our strengths play out. In the Rain Man, Dustin Hoffman was very extreme. He had brilliance around numbers. He couldn't do anything else. Most of us are much more in the middle, where we're not as brilliant and we're also not as weak. But I think that still the most important way to manifest success in our lives is by finding the areas where we're strong, and trying to focus as much of our time in there as possible. And ultimately, helping those around us become our allies and our partners, our cheerleaders, our supporters, the people who ultimately will help foster our success and honor the way we are, the way we're strong, the way we're weak, and also people who want to see us succeed. One of the most important ways that we express value for each other is in seeing people's potential. It's probably more than saying thank you. It's probably more than giving someone a raise. What it says is, Kathy, for a long time, I have seen your potential. And it is an honor to sit across from you in this podcasting booth and seeing that potential play out. And you know that I feel that way about you.
Aww.
And I know that it means something to you. So I think that when we focus on people's strengths, it really says, you've got a lot to give. Go for it. Use your strengths. Your strengths can take you so far.
To learn more about Kathy Kersten, visit her website, kathykersten.com. That's KathyKersten.com. Obey Your Strengths is produced by Geekdom Media in association with Game Day Media Enterprises. Executive produced by Lorenzo Gomez, John Garcia, and Michael Argent.